Put very briefly, among the Manichees, the nature of the material world itself was at stake. It was their bleak view of the material world which gave so sharp a flavour to their notion of almsgiving to the holy poor alone. In this, the Manichees differed markedly from other Christians. Following a tradition shared with Judaism, mainline Christians, by and large, had tended to believe that wealth was somehow touched by the providence of God. By giving to the church and to the poor, the pious Christian was giving back to God a little of the abundance of a created world shot through with God's own blessing. In a similar way, the Eucharist was presented at the Christian altar as a return to God of his good gifts. The bread and wine brought to the Eucharistic altar were spoken of as these thy gifts and creatures of bread and wine. These prayers assumed a basically sunny view of the natural world as the good creation of God. Such a view of the natural world spilled over very easily into a relatively sunny view of the wealth that was taken from the natural world. Wealth also enjoyed God's blessing. It had been given by God to believers so that they could give it back to him in the form of donations to the church and charity to the poor. By the end of the 3rd century, we find in both papyri and in inscriptions, synagogues and churches alike were described as having been funded from the gifts of the providence of God. But no Manichee could possibly harbour such comforting illusions. Wine, they knew, was not a gift of God. It was not even a creature of God. It was the poisonous blood of wounded demons mixed deep into matter and erupting in the dangerous fruit of the vine. The best that could be said of the material universe was, as was in the words of a later Chinese catechism of the Manichaean faith, an immense distillery. It was like one of those magical laboratories in which alchemists had sought, through a long process of distilling and refinement, to wrench from base matter in minute ethereal fragments the unalloyed essence of gold and similar time-defying substances. Sort of 100% spiritual hooch. And it's against this cosmic backdrop that we should place the ritual support offered by the Manichaean catechumens to their elect. The wealth which they offered to the elect was not for them a representative portion of the goodness of a material world created by God, gladly offered back to him by the faithful. It was a last thin vestige of matter, painstakingly prized loose from an inherently evil world, sent on its way in the form of a solemn gift of sustenance to the elect, towards some final transmutation in the treasuries of the heights. Such wealth offered in this way somehow carried with it the very souls of its donors. For this was wealth from which the demonic energy of process had been drained. It was wealth laid to rest. The Coptic term, mton, usually translated as rest, I think would be better translated as cessation. The food offered to the elect had been detached from the sinister exuberance of the vegetable world through plucking, in the case of fruit, a favored food of the elect, or through being cut by the sickle. It lay on the dish as a true nature morte, detached from nature. Manichees would have loved supermarkets, because this was food through which the negative current of energy associated with demonic matter no longer pulsed. Such food was offered for those whose entire life also had come to a stop. The elect were sealed on their mouths, their hands, their genitals. They were thus sealed off from process. They did not join themselves to fully living matter through unregulated eating. They did not contribute to the headlong pullulation of human flesh through intercourse and the begetting of children. Above all, they did not lend their hands to manual labor in the fields, for by stooping to work, they would have involved themselves in the most bloody process of all, the tearing of the earth through ploughing, the slashing of living vegetation. With pale faces, soft white hands, the elect, men and women alike, for in this they were indistinguishable, had left the world. They already lived on the threshold of the mighty cessation that would eventually fall upon the material cosmos as a whole. Now, such a view had palpable social implications. For Mani and his disciples, the social world was a microcosm of a towering and sinister cosmos. The distribution of wealth and poverty in society lacked meaning. The division between rich and poor was just one of the many ugly accidents that occurred in a universe stirred at random by the influence of demonic planetary lords. Wealth could never be called a gift of the providence of God. For this reason, labor, the world of drudgery, of ponos, was a particularly charged emblem of bondage to the world of evil matter. To hold oneself back from labor, therefore, was to draw a clear line between oneself and the endless turning of a cosmic machine. Thus, as a young man, Mani had annoyed his fellow villagers by refusing to feed himself through tilling the ground, through plucking vegetables in the lush gardens that surrounded their settlement in southern Mesopotamia. Instead, he would stand outside the gardens and ask to receive his food as an act of almsgiving, as though he was a mere beggar. For the only relation to the world of which an elect soul, such as his own, was capable of, was one of being totally outside its sinister processes, as out of the loop, as a beggar was outside the normal processes of the agrarian economy. The cosmic backdrop, which accounts for the intensity with which the Manichaean elect rejected the world of labor, has tended to make Manichaeism seem perhaps more exotic, more peripheral to mainline Christianity than it was in reality at the time. In the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, however, the Manichees were only one sharp voice among many in a vigorous debate on a shared theme. A debate on ponos, on the drudgery of labor, was central to the radical traditions of Christianity in Syria as a whole, both ascetic Christians and Manichaean elect. And this is perhaps not altogether surprising. In Mesopotamia and Syria, we're dealing with a region of dense agrarian settlement, sufficiently wealthy to be able to support a certain number of wanderers, and flanked to north and south by regions of mountain and steppe land, which enable the lucky few, the nomad, the brigand, and the holy man, to slip into an environment free of the harsh discipline of the plough. the same surge of population which in the 4th and 5th centuries would cover the highlands of northern Syria with villages of unparalleled density, also cast loose upon the roads an impressive number of charismatic wanderers and holy spongers. But this is not just a matter of ecology. Why did these rootless persons receive such wholehearted admiration? Here we must remember the presence of a very ancient past. Syria, and above all Mesopotamia, were regions which had long been preoccupied with labor. In the words of the Sumerian proverb of the 3rd millennium BC, dullum, labor, the origin of the Hebrew dal, is a dog trailing behind man. The Atrahasis myth in ancient Sumer, the opening chapters of the book of Genesis, where Adam had been condemned to work in the sweat of his brow, the distant echoes of these great myths of labor in the works and days of the Greek poet Hesiod, these all show a region whose inhabitants had long labored in their minds on the theme of work. Already in the 2nd millennium BC, the Atrahasis myth had attempted to explain how human beings had come, I cite, to bear the dullum, the drudgery passed on to them by the toilless gods. Seen against a truly millennia-long background, the exegesis of the fall of Adam and Eve into toil, as this gained prominence in a vocal stream of Syriac Christianity in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, this was the last of a long series of ruminations by which the settled populations of the Fertile Crescent had attempted to make sense of the social trauma that had resulted from the agrarian revolution of the later Stone Age. So let us end by looking at the attitude to labor of an extreme wing of the Syrian Christianity that was contemporary with the Manichaees. Now, in the interest of academic rectitude, let me immediately state, in case there are any Syrian monks present, that Syria was a notoriously diverse phenomenon. There were many Syrias, just as there were many forms of sectarian Protestantism in the burned-over region of Upper New York State. Many of these were very placid. They were based on solid households tied to sedentary Christian communities. But behind even the least radical forms of asceticism, there lay a great sadness, which saw in the origins of labor the secret of human bondage. Like all narratives of the loss of a golden age, where human beings had once enjoyed freedom from toil, radical Christian accounts of the fall of Adam and Eve presented human society as caught in the dull creak of ponos, of drudgery, the Syriac Gamla. Unlike the Manichaees, Syriac writers in this tradition did not believe that the entire material world had been corrupted, but they did believe, and in no uncertain terms, that human society as a whole had fallen. Adam and Eve and their descendant had lost a first moment of sublime leisure. They had declined into present careworn state of a society where human beings were dominated by the need to work so as to eat.